Well, good evening and welcome back to Wednesday Night Live. It is April the 16th, 2014, and we're coming to you from beautiful Pocatello, Idaho, in the beautiful Portneuf Valley, gateway to the great Northwest. And if you've been with us before, you're already familiar with that, and if you haven't, now you know. We are delighted to have you with us tonight. We're doing something that for us is novel, unique. We have a live in-studio audience, as opposed to my normal dead in-studio audience, but we have a live audience tonight because we have a special guest, and we've got some folks that, we'll get to that point. But again, welcome for joining us. As I tell you every week at this time, the area code for the whole state of Idaho is 208. And I remind you of that because I always want to remind you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. I tell you about it every week, so hopefully by now you've even memorized the phone number, 478-HOPE. These folks are all about life. In other words, they're the exact opposite of Planned Parenthood. And as you know, and we all, I think most of us agree, abortion's not an option. Compassion and Hope is. So if you know of a young person that's having trouble, maybe an unexpected pregnancy, maybe a young woman who's afraid to tell her family, or doesn't know where to go for help, rather than go to Planned Parenthood, suggest they go to Compassion and Hope. They're right here in Pocatello near the university. They are very small. They operate on a super small, short shoestring. They don't get millions of dollars of support like the Planned Parenthood people, but they do wonderful work. And as I often say, and I don't say this lightly, they're doing God's work. So if you can help them, call them, 208-478-HOPE, and see what you can do to help them. Financially, maybe you can make a contribution. Maybe there's some other way you can help them. They can use your help. And as I said tonight, John, can we get just a quick shot of the audience while they're still live? There's part of them. All right. You never know what's going to happen. You know, they might just walk out in the middle of the show. So thank you, audience. Give yourselves a hand for being here. We appreciate it. And I'll augment that with, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Go to sleep. Well, there's been a lot going on in the news, and I don't have to tell you. The thing that's caught everybody's attention recently is Cliven Bundy. Cliven Bundy in Nevada. And I think we're going to touch on that because it could have, well, maybe local repercussions on a broad brushstroke way. But before we do that, as you know, May 20th is the primaries, and there's very little time now. It's starting to speed up. Things are moving very quickly. And we have been very fortunate that we have a special in-studio guest tonight who has made the trip from Boise. He's touching the whole state. So I wish I could say he came just to see us, but we were glad that he could stop by and see us. And so may I introduce to you Representative Lawerence Denny. And Mr. Denny, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ralph.
Really
it's a pleasure.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Lawerence before, so we're not strangers. But I'm also very excited about the fact that we're going to get to do, if you haven't met him, tonight we're introducing him to you. And I think you're going to see why, because Mr. Denny has a lot to offer. Now, you know, I come to you from a conservative platform, so you know where I'm coming from to begin with. And I always try to support those with whom I have something in common, like our Republican platform. I'm one of those right-wing radicals that actually believes the platform is what we should kind of support, unlike some folks in the establishment that think that there are only parts that they can support, but still call themselves Republicans. I think you'll find our guest has pretty much a platform point of view. Mr. Denny, tell us a little bit. I know I've got the information here. You've been in the House, and you're former Speaker of the House. You've got a wealth of experience and knowledge. But would you mind just tell us a little bit about you, your family, your background?
Sure, I'd love to. My wife Donna and I have been married for 40 years, almost 41 now. And
very good.
And we have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. And you know, I grew up on the family farm, and when I returned from Vietnam, we bought the family farm, and we farmed most of our productive life. It's now leased out, and I'm pursuing other things.
Other endeavors, yeah.
You know, I have served in the legislature for nearly 20 years, and as you said, 6 years of that was as Speaker of the House, and so I've been involved politically. I actually started out in the Republican Party about 30 years ago, and was a precinct committee person.
Oh, so you've been at the ground level.
I have been at the ground
the
level.
Rubber meets the road.
you know, and as you said, I just filled out the survey on the Republican platform, and I didn't find anything that was really all that objectionable to me, and we signed that, signed everything on there. So
now you didn't sign it with that caveat like some people we can say that said, well, I didn't know I was getting married. I don't know if you've seen that statement. I think it was Representative Simpson was asked about signing it, and he didn't like the idea that he was being cornered. He said, well, I didn't think we were getting married, or words to that effect.
You know, there's very little that I find objectionable in the Republican platform, and I can tell you, you know, if you're a conservative Christian, there are going to be people who attacked you.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And you probably had a couple here and there.
You know, the more you get involved, the more you are attacked.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
You know, I've heard it said that you know you're over the target when you start getting shot at.
And Mr. Denny has been over the target. When you said bought the farm, I was thinking back in my military days, and I was thinking that's a term we don't use. As a Vietnam veteran, I thought, no, don't use that term. But
purchased the farm.
Purchased the farm, yeah, that might be better. Got the egg ranch or whatever.
Yeah.
I was trying to become more familiar with your background today, and you can't just do that all in one study. But there are a number of things that are going to be and already are part of the focus for the upcoming election. And we do have our in-studio audience because I thought it would be helpful to our audience in TV land, as they say, as well as our in-studio audience and to you, to do a little Q&A,
Sure.
get some ideas of some ideas you have. Would it be fair for me to ask you to kind of give us a broad brushstroke of what you hope to accomplish in the Secretary of State office?
Sure, I would love to do that. You know, there are a couple of issues that got me started or got me interested to start off with, and number one was the land board. You know, I do have that natural resource background, and so the land board is a natural for me, and you know, I have the background, the farming background, also worked in the timber industry when I was younger, and also was a partner in a small mining operation, so I have some practical natural resource background to take with me, and then I also have some political background because I served on the Natural Resources Committee all the time that I've been in the House, and I'm currently the chairman of the Natural Resource Committee. So,
good place for us to have you.
You know, and certainly I think those decisions that are made on the land board concerning the 2.4 million acres of endowment lands, I think it's critical to have someone with some knowledge and background in the natural resource industries.
Let me ask you, Representative Denny, it may be an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it just for enlightenment purposes. What exactly, when we're talking about the endowment, what does that actually mean? I realize it means money for us, but how does that actually work? What's the mechanics of that?
You know, at statehood, we were given, the federal government gave us the 16th and the 36th sections of land to be managed, you know, and there were, I think, 8 endowments. The largest one certainly is the public school endowment, but also there's colleges and universities and the state prison system, and the Capitol, and there are others. And those endowments are to be managed, you know, as a permanent funding source, or partial funding source for many of the things that we hold dear in the state. So that's kind of the background. You know, in addition to the 2.4 million acres that the state manages, we also have what's called the Permanent Endowment Fund, which some of the revenue from the sale of property and other things has gone into that, and that money is invested again for the benefit of the endowments.
Now, I don't know if this is a proper context, so bear with me if it seems off, but those endowments have to do, well, you said 8 different areas, but the one that catches my attention right away is land. And that part probably kind of goes off at an angle, but it kind of goes to what I was saying about Clive and Bundy, because we're talking about land issues there. And some 60% of our state is controlled. It's our property, but it's controlled by the feds. How does that affect our endowments? Or does it affect our endowment?
You know, it affects not only the endowments, it affects the entire state. You know, we are operating with about 1/3 of the resources that many of the other states already have. You know, east of Colorado, less than 5% is controlled by the federal government. West of Colorado, it's over 50%. And as you said, in Idaho, it's 62% that's controlled by the federal government. You know, and I think the Bundy case in Nevada is one of those interesting cases that shows, I think, the overreach and the militarization, you know, of the management agencies. You know, I think maybe the play is a little bit harsh. You know, I think you know, as we look at taking back our public lands, I don't think that's particularly helpful to us, but at the same time, I think it does point out what can happen with a federal government that's got too powerful.
Kind of gotten out of control. And we're an interesting state here because, first of all, our title gem state is there for a reason. We are a gem, if for no other reason, but our natural resources. And an awful lot of our natural resources are locked up by the feds. So we're kind of playing catch up all the time, and yet we have the gold in our backyard.
We do. You know, I have some figures on. You know, I'm serving currently on a committee that's studying taking back the lands from the federal government, and some of the figures that we have discovered over the past year is that currently in Idaho on the national forest, we are growing 1.5 billion board feet of timber annually, and we're harvesting about 200 million board feet.
That seems like crazy.
So that means about 1.3 billion board feet of that growth is just adding to the fuel load, and it's being harvested by fire rather than mechanically, where we could, you know, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars fighting forest fires rather than creating thousands of jobs and billions in revenue to the economy of the state of Idaho.
Now, I used the Clive and Bundy thing as a kickoff of this, and going back to a remark you made a minute ago, we're seeing there the extreme. But I think it's indicative of the public mood as it concerns the government and their overreach into our lives, in every aspect of our lives. It's unfortunate, you know, it's kind of a two-edged sword here. My first thought when I saw this, and perhaps you had a similar thought to this, my first thought was, oh no, another Ruby Ridge,
right,
or another Waco. And because the folks there are really upset about this, and they came armed, they came angry, and one of the sad things about it is our government came as the bully,
right,
with snipers and special vehicles and the whole 9 yards. They were doing what they're trained to do, but I couldn't help but think, I would hate to be one of those deputies looking across that line at these fellows, and my heart's going to say, I can't do this. I think they're right. But then that goes to what I really meant to say, and we Idahoans are an independent lot. We don't take a lot of guff. And there are not a lot of us, but we don't take a whole lot of guff.
Well, you know, over the course of the last 200 years, we have allowed the federal government to become what it is today, to become more powerful. You know, if we really believed in the 10th Amendment and states' rights, you know, we would have had this land back a long time ago.
Well, you know, you're going to be considered kind of radical thinking about states' rights and 10th Amendment.
I am radical. You know, I'm one of those who believes that we get the government we tolerate.
That's exactly right.
And certainly, I think we've tolerated way too much in many areas.
Well, now as Secretary of State, how would you be able to actually do something about this land problem, for instance?
Well, you know, that's not specifically one of the duties of the Secretary of State,
Okay.
but as I looked at this race, it appeared to me that none of our statewide elected officials are really out front trying to push this, and I think that this is somewhere that I can be I can be that voice, even if it's not part of my Secretary of State duties. I can be one of those mouthpieces that's asking or demanding that the federal government give us back control.
And you know, I'm glad you said that, because it doesn't hurt to have a good reputation. You have a sterling reputation in the House, in the State House, and some of the people who have supported you. Among the luminaries that I speak first and foremost about is Congressman Raul Labrador. He's supporting you. He's given you the green flag, and that speaks loudly to a whole lot of us. So even if that isn't your direct responsibility, you certainly have people's ears, and you can certainly talk to them.
Well, you know, and I really appreciate Congressman Labrador as well. He first came in when I was first elected Speaker, and certainly he was a quick study. I think he only served 4 years in the House, but I think he's doing a fantastic job for us in Washington.
He is, and I could make comments about the other congressmen. We'll save that for another time. But now, as Secretary of State, one of your primary duties is our elections, the keeping our elections clean. Am I correct?
That's correct. The Secretary of State is the chief elections officer in the state.
And we've had, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
We've had some, well, to be polite, we've had some questionable happenings here in Pocatello. Pocatello has kind of gotten that reputation around the state. People know that Pocatello has a different form of government or something. And it would be nice to know that if we had a problem with our elections, perceived or otherwise, I mean, it doesn't have to really be, but it's the old expression, it's not what you do, it's what people perceive you doing. But
Right.
At least we could go to you and know that you would take a look at it.
Well, I certainly, you know, and I think one way that you keep honest people honest is by them knowing that if they're doing something wrong, they're going to be watched.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with elections. I think that we have to aggressively investigate any charges, and if there are findings, I think we need to aggressively prosecute.
Now, does the Secretary of State have its own investigators, or do you work through the state police? How does that work?
For the most part, the Secretary of State does the investigations.
Okay. And how large a staff do you have? Or
well,
would you have?
As far as investigations, as far as I know, there's only just one, and that's the chief deputy. You know, as far
Pretty busy job.
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but you made a good point. It's as clean as people will allow it, and the fact that they know that you're willing to look into it, hopefully would stop some shenanigans.
Hopefully, we never get to that point where we have to do those investigations, but we know that there are things going on in every election.
Yeah, and it's not just, I use Pocatello because that's our home, and
Right.
we've seen it here locally, and we have had some problems that we felt strongly about and didn't feel that we had an ear to bend, and so we're a little sensitive. But, you know, I talk to people from all over the state, and a lot of counties are having their own problems. They may not be criminal problems, they may just be mechanical or whatever they are, but it's good to know that there's somebody that's the policeman.
Right. Well, you know, back in 2008, when our current president was first elected, there were a lot of same-day registrations. And when I got back to Boise in January of 2009, I thought, you know, somebody should check out some of these same-day registrants and see if they're legitimate. And Ada County had over 40,000 same-day registrants.
That's a lot.
And so I thought, you know, this would be a good project for an intern to go out and check out some of these addresses. And so we requested from the Ada County clerk a list of those same-day registrants. And this is January, 2 months after the election. And it was the end of March before I got that list, 5 months after the election. You know, they should have been available immediately, but it took a while.
You would think.
And when we got that file, we opened it, and the first thing that popped up on the computer was a list that had about 1,000 names on it that was called a go-back list.
I'm not familiar with the term.
Well, I
You mean to
wasn't.
go back and check it again?
I wasn't either.
Okay, I feel better, yeah.
And so I asked, well, what in the world is a go-back list? And the go back list was a list of those same-day registrants that had failed to properly fill out their registration card. They had forgot to sign it or didn't check all the correct boxes. It was incomplete. Technically, they should not have been given a ballot because they were not properly registered. But they, you know, their vote had already been cast and counted, and so there were 1,000, you know, and there were elections in Ada County that year that were decided by far fewer than 1,000 votes.
I read an article that to me was interesting. This is a little history. It's a few years ago, but I remember, and this was when illegal aliens voting was a big thing. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, they had big problems there. We don't view that kind of a problem here as a state. We don't normally look at as the voters and all that. We don't look at it that strongly because the migrant population is smaller than what you would see on the television in Los Angeles, for instance.
Sure.
But it was an interesting article that said that, and I don't recall who they were quoting, but he stated that we know there are 34,000 illegal aliens working in this area. And it was mostly Ada County, if I recall. And the first thing I thought of was, what are they doing here? If we know they're here, what are we doing about it?
Why aren't they deported?
Why aren't they deported? And then my
Right.
next question was, holy smokes, it's California all over again. I wonder how many of these folks are voting on the look-back list or something like that that never got checked out.
You know, and I think that is a problem. If you can get a driver's license and actually have a photo ID, and actually fill out your registration card, if you're not truthful, you could actually be voting and illegally.
Well, in California, I don't know if we recognize this here, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in California they have a card called the matricula. It just means to matriculate or move around. It is not a legal document in this country, but California recognizes it as they would a driver's license, and these folks are voting. Well, what in the heck? Why? What do we expect? If they're voting, what do we expect to happen to the government? You know, and I guess what I'm saying is, I sure don't want to see that here. I don't want to see us. The numbers are small, so it's unlikely that it's going to affect us a great deal. But if it affects us at all,
well, if there's even one illegal vote, it does affect us all.
It's illegal. That's right.
It is illegal.
Exactly. I've been hogging all the time here, and we ask, we've invited folks to be here tonight so that they could take some time talking with you. So,
sure.
Can we bounce a few questions off our audience there? Yes, sir. Would you pass the mic back to him there? Thank you. And hold it by the neck there. There you go.
What's your relation with Russ Fulcher, whom I'm supporting for governor?
Well, you know, Russ Fulcher, I've served with Russ in the legislature. I've known him for as long as he's been in the legislature. We have a very good relationship. I appreciate him, and he's a good man.
Now, how would your office work with him? Would there be a daily working thing with the governor's office, or as needed? How would that interface or work?
You know, there really isn't a daily working with the governor. It's more. There are a lot of things that come through the Secretary of State's office. You know, any executive orders or things like that. You know, come through and are signed and sealed by the Secretary of State. So there is some interaction, but it's not a daily interaction.
But here again, it goes back to what we were talking about. It's good for us that there is a good working relationship, and that the governor, in this case, if it's Fulcher, that he can trust you and knows that you're going to be policing the electoral system. That trust factor is going to play a big part.
Well, absolutely, and you know, and hopefully that would be the same regardless of who's governor. But it would be very easy for me to work with Senator Fulcher.
Okay, and we're hoping to have Senator Fulcher as a guest in the future. So I'm going to tell him that you're ready to work with him.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
How would you go about notification of the Obamacare? How would you go about doing that as Secretary of State?
You know, as Secretary of State, you have very little chance of doing anything like that. But as a legislator, we've actually had a bill that was introduced again this year for the nullification of Obamacare. but as secretary, that's really not something. We more enforce the law, the election law, the sunshine law, and the like, rather than get into the day-to-day lawmaking.
Yeah. So how would you secure our borders? I noticed that's one of your things here that you would work towards. How would you secure our borders?
Well, again, that's I think that's up to our federal government to secure our borders, and I think that's the number one thing that before we have any program of trying to address the illegal problem, I think the number one thing is to stop the problem of the new ones coming in to start with.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Chad?
Oh, sure. Recently I saw a response to a letter concerning the wolf problem, I guess, as it's become now. And our congressman said it'd be a wise thing to try to manage that better. Don't you see any constitutional implications on that, rather than just a wise implementation?
You know, I think the wolves were unconstitutionally introduced into Idaho. You know, so you know, that's if there was a way for us to get rid of them, I think that I'd love to see that. I don't know that there's a way to do that now, but I'd love to see us eliminate as many as we possibly can. And you know, there is the argument that we don't want to see them relisted, but at the same time, I think we need to control the population to where we can live with them, live with what we have.
Well, I just think it's more in the line of public lands. If the states was to manage their own animals rather than the feds, would that be something the Secretary of State would have influence on?
Well, the Secretary of State really wouldn't, but I agree with you. And the animals in the state of Idaho belong to the state rather than the federal government, and we should be managing. Right now, a lot of our deer and elk populations are being eaten by the wolves, and we certainly could do with a lot fewer.
Before we go to another question, I just wanted to, by the way, I want to remind you at home that you can look up Lawerence Denny and see for yourself what he said on many issues. Many of the things we talk about here probably won't relate directly to Secretary of State. Right. I think what people are looking for is reassurance that all of our elected people are on our side. And so often we're not quite sure. So you're getting questions that don't relate perhaps, but they're looking to say, all right.
You know, the questions I'm getting are relating to who I am.
That's exactly right.
And I think that is important for the people to know.
And I led you on that deliberately because I'm looking at Lawerence Denny for Idaho. You can look this up. You should look it up. Look up what he had to say, who has had things to say about him. But one of the things that, several things you said that I like, and they go to the character of the man, the person that we're looking at as our next Secretary of State. He said, my decision-making process is not a random process. I ask some very basic questions, and I would hope that all of our elected officials ask these questions. I know many of us are asking when we're talking to people we're going to be voting for. Will this decision enhance or detract from personal responsibility, freedom, or liberty? That's a good question to ask yourself as an elected person. Does this decision uphold the Constitution? And this is a topic that gets a lot of kicking around these days. If you say you believe in the Constitution, even in our own Republican Party, there are people in the party that say, well, that's a bunch of old white-haired guys from back in the 1700s. What do we care? Others of us say that's the law. That's the law of the land. So I'm very pleased to see that this appears to be a basic tenet of your thinking processes, regardless of what office you're in. It says, and he says, does it promote the common good? And what are our elected officials for but the common good? That's why we elect our people. He says, do the short-term and long-term benefits outweigh the short and long-term costs? And that's an interesting statement. Would you like to amplify that a little bit?
Well, you know, sometimes the short-term gain is great, but the long-term gain is very small, or even there is no gain at all. You know, and I think we need to look at it through the perspective of long-term.
Now that kind of brings us back to what somebody asked a question about Obamacare, and I think a lot of us can say, boy, the long-term it may not affect me miserably, but my grandkids are going to really pay for this.
Well, you know, and I think it's going to affect you and me as well. You know, that with that gray hair, you know,
Yeah.
When we get to be a little bit older, you know, under Obamacare, we may not be able to get that health care at all.
Was that gray hair a shot?
I've got some of
Oh,
that
yeah.
too.
Okay. But that's true, because we've heard about the Obamacare death panels. And if you've read this monstrosity they call the affordable health care, and the more you get into it, the more unaffordable it appears. And every day, if he's not if he's not signing something off, we look at it and we see just another expense being added to it that you look at and you think, I'll never be able to afford that.
Well, it's not necessarily affordable, and it's not necessarily health care.
No, it's not. It's none of the above.
None of the above.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know, when I first, that was a 2,700-page bill that the federal government had to pass so that we would know what was in it.
Yeah, you had to vote on it before you.
And I started looking at that, and I told my wife, I said, you know, this is crazy.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way that this will work. And I kept reading and thinking about it, and I really believe that it was intended to not work. I think it was intended to bring us to that single-payer system, and someday we will all be on Medicaid.
And you know, it's if you look at it pragmatically, there are a lot of people would say that Obama's been a failure, and he hasn't done anything right. But if you look at what he promised he was going to do to us at the very beginning, he has done, so far he's done everything he said he would do. He said he was going to make a massive change of our and I'm paraphrasing, of our social thinking, the very way we do our business. And no matter how much we disparage and how angry we are at what he's doing everything he said he would. It's almost like reading Mein Kampf and then watch Hitler go to work.
That's
He
right.
told you what he was going to do.
That's right.
And so Obama told us what he was going to do, and he's doing it. So no matter how bollocks it is, he's been a success in that respect. And then the next point you put on here, what are the measurable results? And you've kind of touched on that, but.
Sure. You know, for anything to have any long-term impact, we have to measure the results and decide in our own minds whether that is something that's worth keeping. You know, I think nearly all the legislation that we pass should have a 5-year sunset so that we look at it again or revisit it in a few years, you know, to measure the results, to see if it's doing what we thought it would do.
You know,
Yeah.
that's an interesting comment, because the Idaho Freedom Foundation put out a little desk thing. I don't know if you saw this thing that they put out. It has every day of the year dumb laws. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen
And
that.
you look at them, and I've seen a couple of them, and I'm thinking, that's crazy. And then others I think, well, now wait a minute. I guess I'm so accustomed to living with it. I guess it is crazy, but I hadn't thought of it. But you make I think, a good point, and that is there should be some kind of a sunset clause, because some of these laws are 100 years old and they have no application, but they're
Sure.
there. And if somebody wants to put a noose around you, there's a law to do it. And that's just not, I mean, that's national laws, local laws, state laws, whatever. Does the Secretary of State's office get involved in any way in reviewing laws or monitoring them?
You know, not really. There are some laws, you know, that have been recommended to be repealed because, you know, they're outdated, but that is not one of the functions, you know, the primary functions of the Secretary.
Okay. Well, another question? Yes.
Yes, Representative Denny, as Secretary of State, one of the responsibilities is registering of businesses and corporations within the state, and I'm curious how you see that from the Secretary of State responsibilities. Is it geared towards helping the economy grow, or is it police force? What way do you look at it?
Well, you know, I think it was originally intended just to get a list of all the businesses, you know, and have them register. I think it could be much more. I think, you know, when a business comes to Idaho, and sometimes there are a whole list of regulations and things that they have to do to actually to start their business. I think, you know, it would be nice if we had a one-stop shop where where you knew exactly what you needed to do and could do that and sign up and be actually productive within a few months, rather than in some cases it takes several years.
In regards to that, then, as Secretary of State, what could you do to help the businesses grow the economy in our state, and also in bringing new businesses into the state?
Well, you know, I think that's a very good question, and I think one of the things that I think the Secretary could work with the Department of Commerce and try to streamline that process, you know, and make sure that that it's taken care of quickly and efficiently, and get these guys actually having a payroll and getting jobs on the ground sooner.
You know, that may I?
Sure.
And maybe tagging onto that, on your excuse me, on your website, Stop It in Its Tracks, posted on December 6, 2013, in editorials, the rest of the story, in a recent letter to the editor, and I'll just read it here. And
Sure.
The Statesman's editorial board praises Secretary of State Ben Isursa on the way Isursa goes about the job. Ben deserves praise from all Idahoans for running his office in a nonpartisan and even-handed way. Well, that sounds nice. You know.
Mm-hmm.
His work on the Idaho Land Board, however, is a different story. Mr. Isursa voted to approve the Land Board's asset management plan for the state to buy commercial real estate with school endowment money. It goes on, in addition to a 414-unit storage facility and brew pub in Boise, the plan calls for buying office, retail, and light industrial businesses. The Secretary of State believes that the Land Board should operate a profit-oriented business within a government agency. To do this, the plan aims to change social and political attitudes and values, markets, and products. This is a dangerous plan for Idaho, and puts the state in direct competition with private enterprise. The Land Board business plan must be rejected, and it will take the strong leadership of Lawerence Denny as Secretary of State to stop it in its tracks. Would you want to expand on that or amplify on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that caught my attention.
Yeah, couple.
Yeah, and certainly that what the Statesman said about the office running in a nonpartisan and even-handed way. Well, you know, as far as being nonpartisan and even-handed, the Secretary of State is constrained by the code. I mean, that's your job, to enforce the code, and I don't know how you could be partisan in enforcing the law unless you were playing favorites.
Or you're maybe Harry Reid.
Well, maybe Harry Reid. You know, that caught my attention. Certainly, there's no way, if you're following the law, to be partisan.
What about this stuff of having the government competing with private enterprise?
That is that's one thing that we absolutely have to stop. You know, over the past few years, through their asset management plan, the Land Board has got into buying commercial property, and Mr. Forey lists several of the things that they bought, and that is socialism at its best.
Or its
you
worst.
know,
Yeah.
or its worst.
Yeah.
You know, and there's several reasons. You know, any government, any level of government has a distinct advantage because they don't pay any property tax, they don't pay any sales tax or any income tax, and they're buying that property with taxpayer dollars.
And they have taxpayer dollars keeping track of all of it with their employees.
That's absolutely right. So what businessman out there would like to give their competitor that kind of an advantage? I mean, it's like I said, that's socialism at its worst or best.
Either way. Yeah.
And that's something that needs to be stopped.
And I'm kind of amazed that you know, Governor Otter, when he came into office, he seemed to be on track, and it seems like I don't know if he's doing this as a popularity contest or he thinks he's going to win votes, but he seems to be moving further leftward in this area, where we really expected him to be a little bit more business friendly to the businessman and not to the state. So I'm a little surprised at that. That's off the point, really, but.
You know, and I could not tell you which members of the Land Board vote which way. I know that many of their decisions are split decisions.
Do we, anybody else have a question right away?
Lawerence,
Yeah.
What things could you do from your office to help stop the voter fraud?
You know, I think I think the number one thing that we need to do is aggressively investigate every charge, everything that's brought to our attention needs to be aggressively investigated, and the people who bring it need to be confident that we are doing a thorough investigation. And then secondly, I think that if there are any findings, they need to be aggressively prosecuted. You know, there needs to be consequences for the actions.
Is there anything in law that would help you to do that, and to do the prosecution?
The law is there, I believe, you know, to do what we need to do. I think it's a matter of actually doing the investigation and making sure that we follow through when there is a finding.
And is there punishment?
And there is punishment, yes.
For those of you at home, as I said before, you can get more information on Representative Denny, and I urge you to do so, because we're scratching the surface here tonight, and you really need to know. You should always do your homework on anybody that you're going to vote for. Don't just vote for them because they have an R or a D or an I after their name. Even if you're a Republican nominally or Democrat, whatever, look at that individual before you give them your vote, and see what the person that is asking for your vote stands for. Now, on Representative Denny's webpage, he has one of the headings is issues and positions. And I have to say I was very impressed with this. I'm going to just read a statement that he makes, and then we'll get into a little if we could.
Sure.
My position on government. I believe in as little government control in our business and personal lives as possible. It is the responsibility of government to provide for us collectively only those things which we cannot provide for ourselves individually: roads, bridges, police and fire protection, national security, etc. And then, for your convenience, you can go into this. So let me put you on the spot here.
Sure.
The first thing on your list is taxes. What do you have to say about taxes?
Well, you know, I think taxes are a necessary evil. I think that, you know, there are services that the community as a whole needs to have, and certainly I don't mind paying my fair share.
I think fair is the word there, right?
As long as everybody else is paying their fair share as well.
Right.
You know, because it is collective things, you know, like fire and police protection, things that we can't do for ourselves that actually are a function, a legitimate function of government. There are some other things that we're paying for that, in my opinion, are not necessarily a legitimate function of government.
Anything particular you want to touch on?
Well, I think all the entitlement programs it kind of hits the top right there, and that's the biggest federal spending that we have is all the entitlements, and of course they've been there long enough that they're hard to get rid of, but at the same time they're not necessarily a legitimate function of government.
And some of us are old enough to remember 1964 when LBJ gave us the Great Society. I think that's the proper term for it. And that was when we got Medicare and Medicaid and all these other social programs that they're now part of our national fabric. And it would be virtually impossible to do away with them. When I reached an age, and I'm just barely beyond that age, but when I reached a certain age, I had to go on Medicare. And I have to tell you, I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. I accept it. I really don't have a choice. But I didn't like the idea that the government, here again, was going to mandate this part of my life and that I had to answer to them. And that you don't have to be in Idaho and to be independent on that issue.
Certainly, I think, as Margaret Thatcher said, you know, socialism is great until you run out of other people's money to spend.
Yeah, and we've kind of run out of other people's money.
You know, and yeah, we're printing it, and you know, what the federal government is doing, in my opinion, is not sustainable.
I don't see any way that could be either. Budget and spending, and that's just a broad topic. Do you want to address something in there? We've kind of touched on part of it already, but anything you want to expand?
You know, I'm thankful that in Idaho we are required to have a balanced budget.
Yes. And
I have to say that because if we were not required to have a balanced budget, we would probably be in just about as bad a shape as the federal government, because there are so many so many wants out there that are easy to fund as long as you have that unlimited funding source, and as long as you can print money and fund it. But I think I'm glad that we have to balance our budget, and by doing that, we stay, at least I think we stay fiscally sound.
And there are people who have varying opinions about how much they're entitled to of the government's money. Unions in the state seem to come into mind sometimes, but thank heaven that we have the budget restraints. We can agree or disagree, not you and I, but others, about where we're saving or not saving. But the fact that we have a balanced budget is, I think, I agree with you, is a great plus for our state. And we're not in the hole that some of these other big spending states are in.
Well, you know, and we do have some long-term debt in the state of Idaho. And just a few years ago, we had the Garvey program, and I'm, you know, roads and bridges are one of those legitimate functions of government. I do have a little bit of problem though going into debt to finance some of those things, and prior to the Garvey program we had very little debt, and now it's well over $1 billion in debt. And
now I read about that. This was a brand new idea to me about a year or so when I first heard about the Garvey program, but maybe you could give us a little more idea what that is for some folks that may not know about that.
Well, the Garvey program is basically just a loan from the federal government to get certain projects done, and we're actually paying that back with some of the federal dollars that are coming into Idaho. The problem that I see there is how long are those federal dollars going to be coming, and what are we going to do if they stop? You know, how are we going to make that payment on the debt?
And every time the government gives us something, they're not giving us anything except what we had in the first place, but then we have to sustain it.
That's right.
And the Obamacare is the exchange. The exchange is probably a good example of that. They said that they were going to fund it, but they were only going to fund it for 3 years, which they haven't yet done. And then we were going to have to sustain it from that point on. Well, we had to borrow the money from them to start the program that they wanted. So how in the world are we going to sustain it?
Yeah.
Rhetorical question.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
All right. Anybody else have a question? All right. Let's go on to agriculture. This is an agricultural state by and large. What's your view on there?
Well, agriculture, that's been my life for ever since I got back from the service, and certainly I think that there are some areas in agriculture that are on subsidy as well, that the free market system would probably benefit better. I think a lot of those subsidies are not productive to getting what we really need in agriculture. So.
And what's happened with us is we've become spoiled expecting a certain price on something that is actually being subsidized by dollars that we don't see going out, but it's still coming up out of our pocket. Milk subsidy comes to mind.
You know, the idea of some of those farm programs, I think, was good to try and level out the production and level out the income of farmers, but I think in many cases it's had just the opposite effect. You know, I think it causes overproduction in some areas and scarcity in others.
And the small farmer is almost a thing of the past now. Very few mom and pop farms left. So ag business is all big ag business. I mean, there's very little. The subsidies don't do mom and pop as much good as they do ConAg or somebody like that.
You're probably right.
Second Amendment, that's always a hot button issue here in Idaho. What's your view on that?
Well, you know, we passed a couple of bills this year, and one of them was the concealed carry on college campuses, and it was opposed by all the college presidents, but it was passed and signed by the governor, and it's one of those, in my opinion, one of those very basic rights, you know, to be able to protect yourself regardless of where you are. And if you know, there was discussion going around that, okay, if we have these gun-free zones, then the people who are in charge of those need to be responsible for your protection, and that could be a whole lot more costly than allowing somebody to have a concealed weapon on.
Of course, if you have a sign that says gun-free zone, then everybody's safe. Isn't that true?
Well,
Vulnerable. Oh, I guess that was, I got the wrong word.
Well, at least you're not going to get killed by a legal gun.
That's right. That's right. I saw it's meant to be comical, but it's also wry. It said, Second Amendment rights. Your house is invaded. 45 caliber bullet, 950 feet per second. Police response 16 minutes. I thought, yeah, that does make a point, doesn't it? And here in Idaho, I think most of us are going to think that 16 minutes is a long time.
And we passed a second bill this year as well, you know, basically prohibiting our local law enforcement, or not prohibiting, but not allowing them to participate in a federal gun confiscation, which
That was a bold step.
You know, I think it's a right step. I think it's something that needs to happen.
I agree, and I think you're probably going to get 99% of the state, certainly the gun owners are going to agree with you on that. You know, my career was in law enforcement, and I can tell you from the perspective of the street cop, most shooting situations that I went to was after the fact.
Yeah.
We didn't get there in time. And when we did get there in time, then it was pretty bad. But most of the time we got there was after the fact. And it was usually somebody that couldn't defend themselves because they had no gun, no other way to protect themselves. But the bad guy did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't registered. I know that's hard to believe, but.
Yeah.
Immigration, and that kind of touches on the farm issue also. I mentioned that a little bit ago about the illegal, but immigration, your perspective on that?
Well, you know, that's an issue in Idaho and across the country. And again, as I said earlier, you know, I think there are other ways to handle that farm labor problem that some seem to think that we have, rather than allowing illegals to perform that. You know, what part of illegal don't we understand? Yeah. You know, I think there are farm worker programs that have been successful in the past, and I think again we need to make sure that the border is secure, and once we do that, well, then we can talk about the problems that we have with farm labor or with other labor where we need to have people come in to help us with that.
Well, you know, back in the 50s, I don't know if it started in the 40s or in the 50s, but in the 50s there was a program that worked pretty well, the Bracero program.
Mm-hmm.
People got a temporary work permit or visa, however you want to say it. They came to a certain location to pick a particular crop. They made what was very good money for them in their own country, and most of them from Mexico. They knew when they came here that they were going to be living in less than desirable conditions. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It just says they knew when they came here that they were going to be doing back-breaking work for little money, and yet it was 10 times what they were making back there. Then they would go back to their own country until the next season, and it worked pretty well. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and I've never figured out why that had to go the way of the dodo, because it was a system that worked. I don't quite get it.
Well, if you figure that out, let me know.
I will. I'll call you and say, hey, you want to get back in the legislature? We need your help on this issue. Yeah. Education, this is always a hot button. Oh, we had a question. I'm sorry.
I'd like to thank you for serving. I had a brother-in-law that served in Vietnam, packed a machine gun. He didn't like to talk about it a lot, but we want to thank you and salute you and honor you for your serving.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And anyway, we were just getting ready to touch on education. Always a hot button in every state, not just Idaho, but we sure hear about it a lot here.
You know, and education is very important to all of us. But how we educate, I think, is probably more important than just talking about education. You know, you hear a lot of people or a lot of critics say, you know, that Idaho is 49th in the nation, and that's true in the amount we spend per pupil. But the results are, you know, we're right in the middle of the pack. You know, 15th to 25th or 29th. You know, as far as outcomes go. So I think we are doing more with less. It might be good to be able to pay our good teachers more and retain the good teachers in the classroom.
And I think most of us feel the same way about that.
Well,
We don't want teachers to be underpaid. They do it. It's a difficult job.
It's absolutely a difficult job. My wife is a teacher, and certainly, you know, we want them to be paid well for what they do, and because they are dealing with something that's very, very important to us, and that's our kids and grandkids.
Well, and the environment under which educators have to work these days is a very difficult environment. I had the opportunity some years ago to teach at high school for a while, and that was 30 years ago. It was bad enough then, and I'm not a professional educator, so I was doing something out of my realm, so to speak. But I watched what the teachers have to put up with today. The social environment makes it almost impossible for a teacher to be a teacher. There's just so much they have to put up just to make everybody politically happy.
Well, you know, back when you and I were in school, the teacher had some authority, and they could correct us when we were misbehaving.
I remember Sister Louise very well.
You know, and I think that's one of the things that has gone out of the classroom, is the ability to discipline.
Yeah.
You know, and there, you know, it may be a two-edged sword, but at the same time, I think that discipline was very important to me.
Well, when we were kids, I know if I got in trouble at school, I better not go home and tell Dad, because I was in a lot of trouble when I got home. Whatever happened in school was lightweight compared to that when I got home. Not the least of which was because I embarrassed the family, let alone all the other stuff.
That's right.
Well, we're just about at the end of the program, and gosh,
Wow.
it seems like we've covered a lot of the things, and I maybe maybe one quick one, and it's going to have to really be quick. You put down here social issues, life.
I'm pro-life. In fact, I think I have a 100% voting record over 20 years with on pro-life issues, and certainly I think the sanctity of life is probably one of the key issues that make us who we are.
Well said. We don't have any time. I was going to ask if we had a last-minute question. We don't. Do we? It's going to have to really be quick. It's going to have to really be quick.
Okay,
We have
so
a minute.
given that there is voter fraud in our state, our own 2 years ago, 3,500 people voted and 3,700 ballots went through the machine. And so 200 mysterious, votes. I'm for legislation that would give us a hand count vote, where you get a double count. And I'm for, if they want to use their machines, they can send it through the machines. But I think in each precinct, there should be hand counting. Can that be something put in the legislature?
You've got about 10 seconds to answer that question, Representative.
Anything is possible, and I think you're right. I think if there's any chance of fraud or abuse, I think that we need to do that. We need to do a hand count.
Well, Representative Denny, thank you so very much for joining us. I
Thank
really
you,
appreciate
Ralph.
it. Thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you for watching us. Please tune in next week. God bless you and have a good, safe week. Thank you for viewing.